Okay, so get this right. Michigan students are already choosing abstinence more, and they're having less sex overall than like the national average.
Interesting.
But there's this proposed bill. It's called HB 6068. Wants to like totally change Michigan's sex ed standards. We're talking a complete like 180, and we've got a bunch of sources here to help us, figure out why.
Okay.
We're going deep today into this bill. We've got a news article from The Lion. It's kind of conservative leaning.
Right.
Plus, like direct quotes from people on both sides, politicians, parent groups, even a Christian nonprofit got their 2 cents in.
Wow.
So the question is like, why change something if the data is saying it's kind of working right?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. The data does look good for their current approach, but this big push to change everything makes you think there's other stuff going on, like maybe values are shifting or priorities, something like that.
Okay, so let's like break it down. What's actually in this bill, right? So the Michigan Democrats behind it, they want to ditch the term family life. Instead, it's all about, individual choice, centering the whole curriculum around that.
That's a big shift in the language they're using. It's definitely moving away from those like traditional family-focused values towards something more individualistic, about sexual health and how people make choices.
So like, what are they actually changing?
Yeah.
Well, they're taking out some pretty key stuff from the current standards for sex ed. For example, they want to like de-emphasize abstinence. It's not the main message anymore.
Interesting.
And they're getting rid of the language that, specifically says abortion isn't a good way to plan your family.
That's a fascinating change. Just by removing those specific points, it kind of shifts the whole message, Think about it. The way it is now, it says straight up abortion, not for family planning. But when you take that out, well, it doesn't say they like abortion, but it does open up the conversation to like all the choices you've got if you get pregnant.
And that's not all. They're also cutting the parts about talking about, all the consequences of sex. Emotional, economic, legal, the whole shebang.
Right. If you look at the bigger picture, it seems like we're moving away from what some people call the don't do it, it's risky approach to sex ed. Instead, it's more about like giving people the info to make their own choices, recognizing that, hey, young people are going to have sex whether we like it or not.
It's almost like they're saying, look, just preaching don't have sex doesn't work. Let's give them the info to be safe, whatever they decide, right?
Yeah, it's definitely more nuanced, recognizes that this stuff is complicated, but it's also going to cause a lot of debate, that's for sure, especially with people who like really believe in waiting till marriage.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of debate, let's look at the new things they want to add. First up, giving students, quote, the knowledge and skills to make their own decisions about sexual health, relationships, all that.
On the surface, sounds good, right? Who wouldn't want young people to be able to make healthy choices? But it all comes down to how they define knowledge and skills in this, Does it include all the different viewpoints? Or is it more focused on one way of thinking?
That's a good point. And it gets even trickier with the next one, giving non-biased information about every legal option if you get pregnant, which obviously includes abortion, right?
Right.
But how do you even define non-biased when you're talking about something this complex? And let's be real, this is a supercharged topic for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. Who gets to decide what's neutral,
Word.
Whose point of view becomes the definition of unbiased? You can't really separate the facts from people's values on a topic like this.
So true. And then there's the inclusion piece. They want to make sure they affirmatively recognize all the different sexual orientations, gender identities, all that. Make sure the examples they use reflect that diversity.
Yeah, that fits with how society's changing, right? More LGBTQ plus inclusivity, which is good for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But it also brings up questions about like what rights parents have and what schools should be teaching about values. Some parents might say, hey, this is family stuff. We should be handling this based on what we believe.
Yeah, and that tension, like individual rights versus what society thinks is right, that's at the core of this whole thing. But before we jump into those arguments, let's switch gears. Time to hear from the folks pushing back against this bill.
Yeah, let's get those other viewpoints on the table. So we've got Republican Representative Jamie Green. She's spoken out against this,
Okay.
She's worried about taking out that foundational emphasis on abstinence from the standards. Thinks it could like undermine what she sees as a responsible approach. To sexual health.
So she's coming at it from like abstinence is the best choice for young people, right?
Right.
Seems to be a common thread with the folks who don't like this bill. They think moving away from that abstinence first method sends the wrong signal, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just politicians either. We've got Lauren Singleton. She's the chair of the Michigan Sexual Risk Avoidance Council.
Yeah.
She's got reservations too.
Interesting.
She's saying, like, look, the current standards are already good, a solid framework. She's worried these changes would actually, like, take away power from parents. You know, control over what their kids learn at school.
Yeah, that's a big one in education debates, right? State versus local control. Some people are like, parents should have more say, especially about, you know, touchy subjects.
Absolutely. It's about, like, who decides what's okay for kids to learn. The state, with one set of rules, or each community, each family gets to decide.
And then there's Catherine Bessard. She runs this Christian nonprofit, Salt and Light Global.
Okay.
She brings up a whole other angle, saying that, you know, just presenting abortion as one more pregnancy outcome is, well, ethically kind of messed up.
Yeah, that highlights, like, the big challenge here. How do you teach about something like abortion in a public school system? You've got to respect everyone's values and beliefs, right? It's a tough balancing act.
Feels like they're walking on eggshells, you know. One wrong step and bam, they've alienated a whole bunch of people.
Oh, yeah. And this isn't just Michigan. This is happening all over the country. School boards, legislatures, it's everywhere. It's like a mini version of that huge cultural divide we see in America.
It's almost like sex ed has become like a battleground for different ideas about what it means to be, you know, a good citizen who makes good choices.
That's really insightful. It's not just about, like, the biology anymore. It's about values, morals, and preparing these kids for a complicated world, you know?
Right.
21st century stuff.
So with all these strong opinions flying around, how do we even, like, figure this out?
Right.
If Michigan students are already doing okay under the current system, with all that focus on abstinence and stuff, why are they pushing so hard to change it? What's the motivation?
That's the question, isn't it? I keep coming back to it. I mean, these changes definitely fit with how society's views are changing, right?
Yeah.
About sex, relationships, being more independent. But
Yeah.
is it actually going to be better for the kids in the long run? That's what we don't know yet.
Seems like both sides have some risk, right? Stick with what you've got. Maybe it doesn't fit anymore.
Right.
Go too progressive. You might tick off a lot of people who believe in traditional stuff.
It's a classic problem. Individual freedom versus what society thinks is okay. Respecting different views, but also trying to find common ground. And people will probably be arguing about this forever, you know?
It's like all this comes down to one, like, really big question.
Yeah, what's the underlying...
Whose values are going to, like, shape the next generation?
Exactly. It's about, like, who gets to decide, what gets taught, what gets emphasized, what we just don't talk about in schools, you know?
Right.
And those choices, they, like, really affect how kids see themselves, their relationships, how they fit into the world.
It makes you think about...
What happens down the road, right? Like, if you go with this progressive, more inclusive curriculum, does it make people more accepting, more understanding? Or does it just, like, split everyone up even more, you know, based on what they believe?
And then, on the other side...
What if we stick with that traditional stuff, abstinence, all that?
Yeah.
Are we really preparing kids for the world they're growing up in? A world where they can find out anything online, and they've got all these choices to make, way more complicated than before.
Man, it's a lot.
It is. And it's not just some policy thing, you know, happening in some government building. These conversations are happening at, like, dinner tables, school board meetings, all over.
So this brings us back to you, our listeners.
Yeah.
What do you think about all this? What values do you think are, like, the most important for young people to learn? And what should schools be doing? What's their role in teaching those values?
Those are tough questions, no doubt, but they're worth asking, you know? We want you to dig in, look at things from different sides, have those conversations with your family, your friends, whoever.
Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about, you know, the birds and the bees.
Right.
It's about what kind of future we're building. A future where young people can make good decisions, have healthy relationships, live good lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll leave you to think about it all.
Yeah, chew on it.
Until next time, keep on diving deep, everybody.